There are men who are born for greatness and spend their whole lives running from it. And then there are moments, quiet, ordinary moments, when greatness finds them anyway, not with trumpets or golden light, but with a letter, a tired messenger, and a truth they can no longer hide from. His name does not matter as much as what he did. What matters is that he was the Alpha King, the rightful ruler of a vast and powerful kingdom, a man whose bloodline had sat upon the throne for 6 generations before him. He had been raised for leadership. He had been trained for it, prepared for it, dressed for it, and on the day the crown was meant to be placed upon his head, in front of thousands of his people, he looked at it for a long moment and walked away. He did not say he was afraid. He did not make excuses. He simply said, in a calm and steady voice, that he refused the throne, removed his ceremonial cloak, set it gently on the stone floor, and walked out of the hall into the open air. The silence he left behind was unlike anything those people had ever heard. To understand why he walked away, you have to understand the kind of man he was. He had watched power change people his entire life. He had watched his father, a good man, a wise man, become slowly distant and cold as the years of ruling wore him down. He had watched advisors who once spoke with honesty begin to speak only what the king wanted to hear. He had watched a kingdom built on fairness gradually bend toward the comfort of the few and the burden of the many. And he had promised himself, in the quiet of his own heart, that he would never become that. He had told himself that the most responsible thing a ruler could do was refuse to rule, that stepping aside was a form of wisdom, a gift to his people, a protection of himself and everyone around him. He believed this completely, and for a long time, the world did not argue with him. He disappeared from royal life as quietly as a man can disappear when an entire kingdom knows his face. He traveled first to the eastern villages, where the roads were long and the people were too busy surviving to care about politics. He changed his name. He dressed simply. He found work wherever he could. Mending fences, carrying grain, helping rebuild homes after a storm had torn through a village and left nothing standing but the chimneys. He was good with his hands. He was patient. He listened well, and the people he worked alongside, who had no idea who he really was, treated him like any other man who showed up and worked hard and asked for nothing more than a meal and a place to sleep. He loved that life. He loved being no one. In those years, he learned things that no throne could have ever taught him. He learned what it felt like to go to bed tired, in a good way. The kind of tired that comes from real work, not from meetings and ceremonies, and the constant performance of being important. He learned how the people of his kingdom actually lived, not from reports and numbers, but from sitting at their tables, listening to their worries, sharing their bread. He learned that most people did not want grand gestures from their leaders. They wanted to feel safe. They wanted to know that someone in power was actually thinking about them, not as a category or a group, but as real human beings with real lives. He stored all of this inside him, like wood stored for a fire that had not yet been lit. While he was learning to be a better man, his kingdom was learning what it meant to be without its rightful leader. The council, caught completely off guard by his refusal, had appointed a regent to hold things together. The regent was an experienced man, smart, well-connected, and skilled at the kind of politics that happened behind closed doors. But he was not the Alpha King. He did not have the people's loyalty in his bones. He had to earn it every day, and earning loyalty is exhausting work for a man whose primary interest is himself. Small decisions became large problems. The regent increased taxes on the poorer provinces to fund projects that mostly benefited the wealthy ones. He entered into agreements with outside trading partners that looked good on paper and felt wrong in practice. He ignored the quiet warnings of the older council members, who had served the kingdom faithfully for decades, preferring instead the company of younger advisors, who told him only what he wanted to hear. The clans in the northern mountains, who had always been proud and independent, grew angry first. Then the farming communities along the western river, who found their annual grain tax raised for the 2nd year in a row, organized and refused to pay. Then 2 of the 5 great councils formally dissolved, leaving entire regions without governance. The kingdom did not fall apart all at once. It came apart slowly, the way an old cloth tears, one thread at a time, until one day you look at it and realized there is almost nothing left holding it together. He was repairing the roof of an old schoolhouse in a small village near the eastern border when the messenger arrived. She was young, perhaps 19 years old, and she had been riding for 4 days with almost no rest. Her horse was exhausted, her face was pale. She had a sealed letter pressed against her chest, as if she was afraid it might disappear if she held it any other way. She had no way of knowing, when she rode into that village, that the man she was looking for was standing on top of a roof with a hammer in his hand. One of the village children, who had once seen a royal portrait painted years ago, recognized something in the shape of his face and told her quietly. She looked up at him for a long moment. He looked down at her. He climbed down slowly, took the letter from her hands, and stood in the morning light to read it. The letter was written by an old woman, one of the 3 remaining senior council members who had served faithfully since his father's time. She did not write formally. She did not use the language of politics or policy. She wrote to him the way a grandmother writes to a grandson who has been gone too long, with love, and with honesty, and without any patience left for softness. She told him what had happened. She told him how many people were struggling. She told him that 3 clans had declared themselves independent of the Central Council. She told him that the northern food stores were nearly empty going into winter. And then, at the end of the letter, she wrote something that hit him harder than anything else in it. She wrote, "They are not angry at you for leaving. They are waiting for you to come back. There is a difference, and I hope you are wise enough to understand it." He read the letter twice. He folded it carefully and put it in his coat pocket. He looked at the messenger. "How bad is it?" he asked. She did not soften her answer. "It is very bad, my lord." He nodded slowly. He handed her his water flask and told her to rest her horse. Then he sat down on the stone wall at the edge of the road and was quiet for a long time. That night, he sat alone by a small fire he had built in a field outside the village. He did not sleep. He did not write anything down or speak to anyone. He simply sat with the truth he had been trying to avoid for years. The truth was this. He had not walked away from the throne to protect his people. He had walked away to protect himself. From the responsibility, from the weight, from the fear of becoming something he did not want to become. And while he was busy protecting himself, his people had been left without the one thing they needed most. This was not easy to admit. It is never easy to look clearly at your own reasons and discover that the story you have been telling yourself is not entirely true. He had told himself he was being noble. He had told himself he was being wise. And now, in the dark, with the letter folded in his pocket and the memory of that young messenger's exhausted face in his mind, he had to admit that he had also been afraid. Fear is not shameful. Every honest person is afraid of something. What matters is what you do when the fear is finally named. By the time the fire burned low, he had made his decision. He would go back, not because it was easy, not because he was no longer afraid, but because it was right, and because the people of his kingdom deserved a leader who showed up for them, even when showing up was the hardest thing in the world. He did not return the way a conquering hero returns. He did not ride in on a great horse at the head of an army. He walked into the capital city on foot, in his plain working clothes, with nothing more than a travel bag over one shoulder and the sealed letter still in his coat pocket. The guards at the eastern gate did not recognize him at first. One of them frowned and looked at him for a long moment. The way you look at someone whose face is familiar, but whose name you cannot quite place. Then something shifted in the guard's expression, a small, quiet shock, and the word began to travel through the city faster than any official announcement. He is back. By the time he reached the center of the city, people had come out of their homes and their shops and stood along the sides of the road, watching him walk. There were no shouts or celebrations. No one threw flowers or called out praises. They simply watched, quietly, steadily, with expressions that were difficult to read because they held too many things at once: relief and caution, love, and something close to disbelief. An old woman near the edge of the crowd reached out as he passed and placed her hand briefly on his arm, as if she needed to confirm he was real. He stopped walking. He looked at her. He placed his hand gently over hers for just a moment, then continued on. That small gesture, that brief pause, was reported and retold more than any speech he ever gave. The meeting with the regent and the council was not comfortable. He did not go in with accusations or demands. He sat down at the long table in the council chamber, and spoke the way a man speaks when he has spent years thinking and is finally ready to be heard, clearly, calmly, and without anger. He acknowledged that he had left without giving the council the tools they needed to lead in his absence. He said this plainly, without making excuses. He said it was his failure, not theirs alone. Then, just as plainly, he described what had gone wrong under the regent's leadership. He named the decisions that had caused harm. He named the communities that had been overlooked. He named the agreements that needed to be undone. He did not raise his voice once. There was a moment, near the end of that meeting, when the regent looked at him across the long table, with the expression of a man who knows the argument is over, not because he had been beaten, but because he had been shown, clearly and without cruelty, what he was not and could never be. The regent stepped aside that same evening. He refused a formal coronation ceremony. Instead, the following morning, he stood in the open square at the center of the city. No throne, no raised platform, no guards forming a wall between him and the people. He stood on the same ground they stood on, and he spoke. He told them the truth. He said he had been afraid. He said that when he walked away from the throne, he had told himself it was the right thing to do, but that in his heart, he had also been running from the weight of what it meant to truly lead. He said this was wrong. He said he was sorry. He told them that he had spent years living as one of them, not as a king observing, but as a man working, listening, and learning, and that those years, painful as they were, had given him something no royal education ever could, a real understanding of what their lives were actually like. He told them he would not promise to be perfect. He would make mistakes. Some of his decisions would turn out to be wrong, and when that happened, he would say so, and he would fix them. What he could promise, the only promise worth making, was that he would never again choose his own comfort over their well-being. He would never again leave when things became difficult. When he finished speaking, the square was quiet for a long moment. Then someone began to clap. Then another person. Then the sound rose slowly, steadily, like rain beginning. Not a roar, not an explosion, but something real, and warm, and earned. The work that followed his return was not glamorous. There were no great battles or dramatic moments. There was only the long, unglamorous effort of rebuilding trust, one decision at a time. He traveled to the northern clans personally, not with an army, but with 2 advisors and a willingness to listen. He sat across from men who had real grievances, and he listened to every one of them without interruption. He did not agree with everything they said, but he heard them, and in most cases, what they needed more than a solution was to know that someone with power was paying genuine attention. He restructured the tax system so that the heaviest burden did not fall on those who could least afford it. He dissolved the agreements the regent had made with outside trading partners that had quietly taken advantage of the kingdom. He opened the council chambers to representatives from every region, farmers, craftspeople, teachers, and healers, not just landowners and military officers. He made enemies in doing this. Some of the wealthier families, who had benefited from the old arrangements, were furious. They wrote letters and held meetings and tried very hard to make him feel that he was wrong. He read every letter. He attended some of the meetings. He remained polite and firm and did not change course. He had spent too many years learning to let the discomfort of the powerful undo the progress of the many. He ruled for many years after that. The kingdom he left behind when he eventually passed was not perfect. No kingdom ever is. But it was fairer, more stable, and more honest than the one he had been born to inherit. The clans of the north had rejoined the central council. The western farming communities had been given protections they had never had before. Schools had been built in the villages he had once lived in and worked in as a plain man. But perhaps the most lasting thing he left behind was not any law or building or agreement. It was a story. The story of a man who had every reason to stay comfortable, every reason to keep his head down and let someone else carry the weight, and who chose, when it truly mattered, to walk back toward the thing he had run from. People told this story to their children for generations. They told it not because it was a story of a perfect man, but because it was a story of a real one. A man who made a mistake. A man who admitted it. A man who came back. And in the end, that is what made him a king worth following.